All right. Ambassador Peterson, Lisa, thank you for that. Thank you for those kind words, and thank you for joining me on stage. I'm Damon Wilson. I'm the president of the National Endowment for Democracy, and let me just start off with a few words before I introduce our extraordinary guests. First of all, what an honor. What an honor to have you in the House. Congratulations. We're so proud of the endowment to be partnering with state to host this today with many of our extraordinary partners. We love working with state, with DRL. Lisa, your team's been fantastic on this. I want to echo Ryota's shout out and acknowledgement to Humanity United, the Center for Victims of Torture, Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, as well as our partners at Freedom House, NDI, and Art Lords. Because this morning was really about how to raise our game. The challenges that we are facing around the world, and we'll talk a little bit about this today to understand the challenges you face, as Ryota referred to already, from Autocracy Inc., from autocrats working together. It means that we need to be on our feet, innovative, learning together, understanding that our democratic network is the way we can help defeat an autocratic network. But it means we can't rest on our laurels. We're inspired by the sacrifices our human rights defenders who are with us have made, the stories that you will share. But it has to inspire us to continue to learn, to innovate, to work together, to have each other's back, to raise our game so that we aren't being outfoxed, outflanked by new AI surveillance technology, by other tools that are being deployed against us, but we're figuring out how to outflank that. And this is what the people that you fight for, this is your struggle, what they depend on. So this morning was really about learning, about these workshops, the networks, the skills, so that we learn together and get more powerful together. Lisa has just echoed the call to action, which this crowd doesn't need. It's in your soul, it's in your DNA. And this afternoon is really about understanding that challenge from autocracy and figuring out how we respond together against it. So we know the premise. We're in 2 decades of a democratic recession. Thank you, Freedom House, for helping us understand that. But it's different. The past few years are different. It's sharper. The authoritarian repression at home, you know it in many of your countries. It's become sharper. It's got an edge. It's produced a remarkable stream of democratic diasporas. Some of you now, unfortunately, part of that are so critical to the democracy movement. And it's been connected with the export of the tools, tactics, technologies from autocrats to make your jobs more difficult, compounded by new technologies, information environment that can help incentivize polarization, combined with financial networks being turned into kleptocratic networks, so that essentially dictators help finance other dictators to repress their people to stay in power, to remain rich. And we compound this with democratic erosion in our own societies. And now we have an energy crisis, a food crisis, inflation coming out of this pandemic. So one human rights defender, when you do this work alone, when your husband had worked alone, it can feel daunting. You've got power and strength from your soul, but you're up against something structural now, the sense of Autocracy Inc. And so we've got to figure out how to do this together. And your work already, the work of the partners that we support across the endowment, many of whom are with us, just think about where we started last year in 2022. Autocrats in January 22 on offense, Vladimir Putin, troops surrounding Ukraine, Xi Jinping riding high on the pandemic, hosting the Olympics, an autocracy, theocracy in Tehran, feeling confident. And then look what happened with Burmese people still pushing, Sudanese pushing to get back on the reform track, not to mention the white paper revolution challenge in China, incredible courage. The struggle that we've seen from so many Ukrainians. And of course, I was just talking to our Iranian fellow here, women, life, freedom. It's extraordinary. The demand for democracy is resilient. You know that, but you see that in so many of those out there that you're fighting for. And that's why we talk about this as claiming the democratic future, because it's not going to be handed to us. It's not going to be handed to you. How do we work together to claim that democratic future? And you've decided that you're going to pay a high price. Your work, the work of human rights defenders, comes with a lot of risk. Last night, we hosted a documentary released from Vladimir Kara-Murza, who's in prison in Russia for anti-war protests. I've just come back from Nigeria, where so many involved in the UNSR movement find themselves still in prison or in exile. And as Ryota mentioned, the loss of Thulani Maseko of Eswatini within 72 hours, John Williams Natali from Rwanda, Martinez Zogo from Cameroon, within 72 hours, 3 prominent human rights defenders across Africa lost their life last week. So this is why we're here to learn. The stakes are high. To understand, how do we understand the Global Authoritarian Network against human rights defenders, what Anne Applebaum has called Autocracy Inc., how to understand that it's organized in its attack, to see in many cases, as we'll talk about, as the UN Special Representative report has spotlighted, to cut off the financial access, to cut off the oxygen, to close the civic space. And to have this conversation, we have 2 extraordinary honorees that are with us today. It's really awesome to have you in the house. Furthest from me, Clement Bollet, a national of Togo, welcome. The United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Rights to Freedom and Peaceful Assembly and Association. Before that, he led the International Service for Human Rights to support human rights defenders. He served as the Secretary General for the Togolese Coalition of Human Rights Defenders, Secretary General of Amnesty International in Togo, and led the Togolese Coalition for the International Criminal Court. And here closest to me at the center, Sophie Leung Shengzhen, the wife of human rights defender, the recipient, Ding Jiaxi, last night, who was honored, who remains in jail. You represent his voice. An engineer by trade, you in your own right have become a remarkable activist, fighting for the freedom of your husband and others in China. Her husband, of course, a human rights lawyer, a member of the New Citizens Movement that campaigned for greater transparency among the CCP, greater equality in the education system, and has paid for its price. So I want to turn to you first, Sophie, in the conversation. Like many other family members, you're having to speak for a husband, a spouse, a child that's imprisoned. I see some nods in the heads in the audience of those who have experienced that. Those who have been wrongfully detained numerous times. He remains in prisons under charges of subversion of state power for his human rights work. Can you share with us a little bit about your husband, his struggle, and why he and now you have taken on this cause? Tell us the story, Sophie.
Okay, thank you.
And you have to push that button so you have a green light. Perfect.
Thank you.
You're good.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Thank you, U.S. Department of State, NED, all the NGO, and everyone to be here today. I'm so thankful and honored to be here on behalf of my husband, Ding Jiaxi. When I see I have only 4 minutes, because I can talk about my husband day and night. He has so many things I can talk. Since we have time limitation, I decided to talk in this way. I'm going to talk about his background. He's an engineer by trade also. We met in a thermal transfer laboratory. We fall into love each other the moment we saw each other. So we all like our engineering background. I'm mechanical engineer. We both are mechanical engineering. And then he studied by himself of the civil law for cooperation and copyright things, actually general. Then he passed the bar exams and get the lawyer certification to do. So he actually started with a commercial lawyer. And then on 2010, he was introduced into some human rights group lawyer. Then he right away think that is what he looked forward to do, because when he was a little one, his ambition to be a lawyer is to speak for people. So he became a lawyer since then. And then he did all kinds of things until 2003. He founded his own partnership in Beijing called De Hong Law Firm, means virtue and ground virtue. So he make his law partnership very successful, but he's still looking forward to do something different. That is what he found on 2010 about the human rights. He right away devoted himself on all the cases his peers shared with him, and he started to go to see the appealing people, go to talk with them, and so understand their plight very well. Then he went to Fordham University to do research for 8 months, to look during this period, he looked back more about China. Then he knows the censorship system of Chinese government because he can do all the freedom research in United States. And he researched on the democracy development of all different countries in the 8 months. And when he went back, then everything he is able to see in United States, not able to see in China. So he feel more and more urgent to fight for the rights. So in that case, he right away, after he went back to China on October 2012, he right away started to involve all kinds of activism related with human rights, censorship. But his core of his cause is to call people to practice the rights protected by Chinese law and the constitution, which the government and completely written in the paper very clearly what kind of rights they have. And also the tools he used is nonviolent protest. He kind of set up all kinds of seminars, and citizens get together to discuss about it. And he encouraged people to be a citizen with voice and attitude. So means just use the weapon you already have in your hand, the law and the constitution, to fight the evil things in the society. So he called for freedom, righteousness, and love. And he worked together with his best friend Xu Ziyong and lead the citizens movement, and basically set up the networking of the people, and to do some specific cases is call for the government transparency and equal education. That is the two specific case they involved in. But the basic things is to call people to practice their rights.
Right.
He talked to me, said, democracy, we need to take democracy as our everyday life.
Yes.
We can talk about it, practice it. It's not something unusual. It's just your daily life. So this is his cause. But because of this, he suffered a lot. Firstly, from 2013 to 2016, he was jailed for 3.5 years. And from December 26, 2019, he was taken away into secret detention for 6 months and tortured for the whole 6 months. And right now he is still in the detention center in a very small cell with very terrible living condition, without paper, pen, book, newspaper. But he keep doing exercise every day. That is the only thing he can do besides his freedom of thinking. Because he was deployed of freedom of speaking and express, but he can still think. He has a lot of ideas. But what I want to say is he basically transferred from a commercial lawyer to human rights lawyer without political target, and became, after he was tortured, he totally became a determined anti-authoritarian fighter.
So, Sophie, you have so eloquently and I'm sure painfully underscored the case of what we feel, what you feel, the sharpness of that autocratic repression at home. We talked a little bit at the beginning about the sophistication of autocratic outreach around the world, this Autocracy Inc. concept. How do you see the reach of the Chinese regime, not just what it's doing internally to its people, but around the world, whether it's the reach transnationally, targeting Chinese, Uyghurs, others, and transnational reach of the regime, or in how China is impacting democracy globally around the world? How do you think about the PRC's reach outside its borders?
When I think about, when I talk about Chinese authority, I always use CCP, Chinese Communist Party. Yesterday we went to the VOC museum,
Right.
which I right away, I said I was re-educated about what is communism. After I go through only the first session, I right away said this is a fantastic museum to tell people what is real communism is. So Chinese government, Chinese regime is a CCP word, communism word. According to all these 10 years, from 2013, my husband firstly arrested until today, I saw very day-to-day clearly, communism equal to dictatorship, totalitarian, and autocracy. And definitely, communism equals to evil things. I always compare it as COVID-19. They are like poison to spread to every corner of the world. It kind of get all the dictatorship country more and more arrogant to persecute people, abuse human rights. So Chinese is a threat not only to Chinese people, is to the whole world. Just thinking about COVID, I don't want to say COVID is from Communist Party, but Communist Party definitely, like COVID, will hurt everyone in the world. So.
Thank you, Sophie. Thank you for sharing this. Let me bring Clement into the conversation. And we're talking about trying to understand global authoritarian networks against human rights defenders. Part of the target of that effort has been civic space. And so courage and sacrifice and spades from many in this room, many that are working in these fields, and yet we're supposed to be operating within a global system in which there's some degree of a social contract represented in a UN charter, but it doesn't quite feel that way. So you and your team have been conducting research over the past couple of years on the state of civic space. You've submitted a report to the UN Council for Human Rights last summer. Share with us a little bit of your findings and how you're seeing the impact of autocrats on civic space.
Yes, thank you very much, Damon, for the opportunity. Let me also quickly thank the NED, National Endowment for Democracy, World Movement for Democracy, but also State Department for really providing me this opportunity to kind of have this exchange. And I can only just really, Sophie, really admire your courage and your husband's courage, because you are doing your determination also. Provide us the hope that the work that we are doing as the special rapporteur, where we are investigating the mandate to raise your voice, to remind your states about the important work that you are doing. This is something that really gives us courage. And I want also to convey really our sincere admiration, and our appreciation to your. And I think Ryota, you just also mentioned one of the cases here, and which happened only 2 weeks ago, Tulani Maseko, who was, what he was doing, he was just asking his government to uphold democracy. He just working to say the community needs freedom to work together. And what's happened to him? He gets killed. And he lets his husband and his kid. For what? For only reminding State that people need freedom. People need to be the agent of development. People need space to be able also to convey their message, to be able also to feel that they participate to the development of the country. And I think this is one thing that we need also. You just mentioned an important aspect. Today, unfortunately, what we are seeing, and from my report and my colleagues since 2010, we are seeing really a dangerous decreasing of the democratic space in many countries. And it decreasing in the speed where today I'm saying that the way that the climate change is completely decreasing. Democracy is in the same path. That's why it's important for democratic society, it's important for all of us to understand that the work that frontline defenders are doing now is to save our freedoms, is to save us from emerging of this authoritarian regime that is coming up today. And we are seeing that today. The authoritarian regime are not only sticking in their space, in their country, but they are learning. They are also going for, and I mentioned this in one of the conferences, that when people are crying for democracy in a country, China, Hong Kong, Nicaragua, everywhere, and democratic society keeps silence. What is happening is authoritarian leaders, they will never stick in their country. As soon as they are able to control their country, they will move forward. They will come to the international scene, impose their rules, including the access to funding. This is what we are seeing. We saw, for example, recently, Russia and China start adopting foreign agent law. And what is happening? Nicaragua, El Salvador, many countries are trying to implement the same provision. So for me, that's the core of the thing, to say that authoritarian regime are learning, and unfortunately, democratic society, we are not reacting quickly as we should. They are taking advantage of us. That's important. What my assessment today is, we need today to really continue to emphasize the importance of those fundamental freedoms, the right to peaceful assembly and association, as a core of any democratic society. That when our own society are uploading those values, and other society or other people are struggling with these rights, and we are not able to support them through means, through political support, we are also setting up our own country to be taken by the authoritarian. And we are seeing that. One of the things that is today, I want also to tell you, is also the whole narrative around democracy today. It started somewhere here also. We know. And we know how some of the countries are taking advantage of that. Brazil, India, many countries today. And those narratives today that civil society is a foreign agent. Mm-hmm. Civil society is working for foreign agenda. Yeah. And this is what my report trying to assess. And one thing I'm trying to do in this report is that we all agree and sign off the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights and say everyone have the rights to form an association and to operate freely. And when you form association, you defend your interests. You can defend those interests or interests of a community without access to resources. And now what authoritarian regime is doing, yes, we recognize that association, you form association, but we don't recognize your ability to receive funding, in particular foreign funding. At the same time where those authoritarian regimes kill completely national philanthropy, knowing that an organization without resources is not able to impact any work in his community. And I emphasize this in my report, saying that we need to understand something. The access to resources for civil society is not a privilege. It's not a privilege. When states limit the right for association to access funding, what state is doing is also to limit the capacity of those communities to be supported. We saw in many communities, in many examples that my report also assessed, where states resort to restrict the capacity of association helping women to bring cases to the justice. Cases of violation of violence against women, rape. And what happened is that during the period that civil society or this organization was not able to get proper funding, it's thousands of women that was left without access to justice, meaning that the perpetrator now empower themselves to be able to continue to violate these rights. So my report assessed that. But my report also points out one of the aspects which we need also to discuss, because I think the beauty of democratic society is also sometimes to challenge our own way to work. That's how the beauty is also that today, the practice of some funders, sometimes also without knowing, contributes, in particular when funders deal with authoritarian, civil society working in an authoritarian system. We need also to look at that. My report also assessed that, which is important, that donor community need to rethink about how to support people working in restrictive environments, to ensure that those help does not expose those civil society working in very difficult conditions. By, for example, lifting some of the requirements, adapting some of the funding, ensuring that civil society is supported for long term, not just for one activity. Because what it does is then it helps people to build and fight against authoritarian system for long term, not just for one activity. It is also important. And this is what I'm trying to do today and speaking. Because I think those discussions are important if we want to counter authoritarian regime. And one of the things also that my report, and I will end by them, is two things. Is that today we all agree that fighting against terrorism is important. Fighting against money going, being laundered, and it is important. But we should not accept that authoritarian regime use this as a pretext to limit the ability of civil society to get funding to do their legitimate work.
That's right.
This is some of the highlights of my report.
I just have to say this report is so important. It's becoming a pernicious issue around the world in so many countries, as you say, metastasizing. And I'm really interested in some of the ideas. Some of the staff here at the endowment will know we're talking about some of these issues about how to be better partners, whether it's long-term, whether it's thinking about some requirements. Very interested in how to practically take forward your work. You've done this report in the context of being a special rapporteur for the United Nations. The United Nations is a global body, and we've really seen, as I said, that social contract that sort of underpinned the UN Charter, and yet you watch in recent years how autocrats have used the UN system for appointments, to distort the way it works, undermine some norms, almost feeling like they're trying to use the UN system to make the world safe for autocracy rather than being an instrument to help human rights defenders, individual citizens. This is played out in spades in the way that you've seen countries on the UN Human Rights Council. How has this affected your work and the work of the global network of human rights defenders when often the bodies that they want to turn to for recourse, and they're sitting across from many of those autocrats that are actually trying to repress them? How does this affect that work?
Well, let me maybe put it clear. What those authoritarian regimes want today is to build a new form of understanding of human rights. That's it. We want a new norm, not those system, mechanism that denounce violation, but those mechanisms that serve states, that agree with the state in everything. This is what is happening. For me, as a rapporteur, one of the things that the council empowered me is my independence, that I can speak, even tell the council what is not working within the council. But what those authoritarian system is doing now is to bring their own national ideas, because they finish restricting the space for them. Now they are bringing it to the council, changing the norms, trying to change some of the resolution to say that this is our thinking about the human rights. This is how the system should work. You can only come to assist us and say what we want you to say. You are not allowed to tell us that we are not respecting our obligation. This is what we are facing. You are not allowed, for example, to meet Chinese defenders because they are all terrorists. This is what about. You are not allowed to meet with people from Belarus because they are all. And this is also affecting the system because the system is blocked in a way that you end by looking within the Human Rights Council when you are speaking as you have a specific agenda. How many countries, authoritarian regime didn't tell me that I have a specific agenda in withdrawing some of those governments? Or I have a specific agenda, which is Western agenda. Why? Because I believe on human rights.
Yeah.
Why? Because I'm speaking to the truth. And I'm saying that freedom is not about the Western, is not about, freedom is inherent to the human being. We all want to have space to say what we want to say. We want space to be able to work within our community, to be the agent of our own developments. We don't want development that will be imposed and states adopting the policy without consulting us. Creating this space, is it something that we should be seen as working for a foreign agenda? No. Who doesn't want to live? Who doesn't want to be able to participate in his own community, to decide on his own future? Why fighting against climate change should make somebody look like a terrorist? Why young people are protesting on the streets, asking the state to take concrete policy to mitigate the climate impasse should be seen as a terrorist?
That's right. Clement, a couple of things you said. One, it underscores why we always talk about support, democracy support, to underscore that many of you are going to do this work regardless. It's driven you to do it. And so the idea of having the ability of civil society to support civil society and to support those in their struggle and their cause, and recognizing that this really is that universal set of desires, it's grounded in local communities. But the other thing that I think we're grappling with, it's really quite disturbing to see how autocrats are manipulating, changing the definition of not just human rights, but democracy. Our Chinese colleagues have seen how much the CCP has gone at length to redefine democracy. But it also gives me a little bit of optimism, because in some respects, it seeds the point that there's value in human rights that's universal and insatiable, and that democracy really does underscore the value of legitimacy. And so they're no longer arguing that democracy is not the issue. They're trying to co-opt and redefine. In some respects, it's more dangerous, but it gives me optimism because we've won the existential argument. Now we have to win the actual application of the argument. So I want to turn to Sophie for one more question. I want to bring you in. We've got incredible people in the audience, so I want to hear from you. But Sophie, you're not just a spouse, you have become an activist. How do you leverage being outside of China, outside of where your husband is detained, to highlight his story, to give him voice? But how do you see this as how people in exile can fight autocracy, fight repression from outside their home countries?
When my husband come to visit me, he always think he has to go back. Everything have to be on the ground. But when these 3 years, when I fight for him, I think actually we have a lot we can do outside the autocratic country. One first thing is the truth, the strength of the truth. First thing we can do is to help to spread the story, to tell people how evil communism are. What is the truth behind the beautiful word of communism used to cover their evil? This is because when my village people knows Ding Jiaxi's story, they were shocked. They said they can't believe this is really happening in China. He's tortured for 6 months and he's put into jail for no reason, and he was forced, disappeared, arbitrarily detained as they want. So the first thing we can do is about to use the strength of the truth. The second thing we can do, I think everyone has already said, the solidarity of our democratic country to work together, the NGO work together. We have to set up some kind of democratic alliance. Economically, we set up some agreement. We help each other. It's not only morally helping. We are help based on some treaty, based on some agreement, joint agreement together to set up this kind of treaty, like NATO, like. So I'm sure if my husband come out, he can come out, I will ask him to do the same. And this is what I look forward to do after I retired from my work, if still no people to do it yet. And the third thing we really want to do is also why my husband want to go back to China. We can empower the people, the human rights defender on the ground, because the autocratic country, they use so much high tech to survey them, the sharpening engineering, we are exposed to the government. But we have so many high rocket scientists. We can make the technology work better for the human rights defender, to help them avoid the surveillance, to help them to have some meeting online without people can know in them. Like my husband, they going out for a meeting, they can be as secretly as they want. So this is the third thing. The fourth thing is also, I'm sure many people is already doing, is to demolish the firewall, to let the people in the country to see the truth, to let the people sharpening their eyes to see the evil by themselves. No need we tell them true story, so they can see the true story by themselves. And Ding Jiaxi always said, if people see the truth, people knows what they need to choose, what they need to do. So I want to say these four things first. Thank you.
I think you have captured, the power of what all of you are working on, at the essence, how to actually have access to truth and to be able to share. That's really, really well put. Final word, Sophie.
For me, I still have a lot to say, but the most important thing is I want to call for everyone's attention to the white paper revolution case in China. They are organized by some young generation people, the university student. They are right now persecuted by the government. And I believe this event, or say movement, will still going up, because we have many people worldwide watching them. I want to call for everyone, in case you see this happen again, just raise your paper to support this young generation revolutionist. Thank you.
Hear, hear. Please, final word, Clement.
Yes. Thank you very much. I just wanted also to say something. Yes, you are right saying that democratic countries are not so active, or compared to how the authoritarian regime are able to undermine things quickly. But we have also to acknowledge that in recent years, Human Rights Council really progressed on many issues. There are many, many, many country issues that we will never consider them without, and let's say it clearly, U.S. being back at the Human Rights Council is helping quite a lot. And it's important to continue to encourage Biden administration to continue to build this coalition beyond Western country. But today, middle countries are important to continue to save the international system. It is important. And today, we are seeing that. We are able to get special rapporteur on Russia. We are able to hold a special session on Iran. This is not something that will happen without this commitment. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Join me in thanking them. It can feel daunting dealing with Autocracy Inc., but the truth is there are so many, you have people on your side, and they are acting from a position of fear of you. They're afraid of you, they're afraid of their own citizens, And that ultimately is an extraordinary power that you bring to bear. So with that, it's an honor to close this first session. Let me invite the award recipients up to the stage. If we could do one photograph, and we will transition to our second panel. If we might, Ambassador Peterson, please join us up here. Thank you. Thank you.